Right, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Cinnamon Moffett. I'm the research program manager here at Hatfield Marine Science Center located in Newport, Oregon. I just want to thank everybody for coming to our Thursday seminar. And just a reminder, this is a hybrid event. So thanks everybody online for joining us here as well. Just a couple of logistics and then we'll get started. For those folks online, we do have your cameras, mics, and screen shares turned off. So if you have any questions, just put them into the chat and Roseanne will read them out to us at the end and we can get those answered. For folks in the room, if you have a question, when we open up question and answer, you will need a mic. So you can either go to the mic stand that's over on the side of the auditorium or raise your hand and I'll run this mic up to you so that you can ask a question and those folks that are online can hear as well. A couple of other quick announcements. I just wanted to promote next week's seminar. So that is already October 13th. We have Keith Hernandez, who is one of our current postdocs with the Marine Mammal Institute that's going to be talking about pinniped diets. So if you would like to come to that one, it'll be in this room, the same place, same time, just a different date. So come join us for that. But the reason that you're all here is for our speaker today. So we're going to do just a really quick little bio for our speaker. So Graham Shaw is with us today, a relatively recent graduate with a master's from the Marine Resources Program at Oregon State University, and is now working for a company that does all sorts of amazing things that I just learned about. And it's Linker. See, I'm going to say it wrong again. And he is a resource specialist there working on projects both all the way from Alaska to Hawaii. But he's going to be talking to us a little bit about some local work that he did here. So I'm going to hand it right off to Graham and let him take it away.
All right. Thank you, Cinnamon. Thank you so much. It is a pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody. My name, as mentioned, is Graham Shaw. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about tidal wetlands and the socioeconomic evaluations that you can do on them. Just a quick show of hands here. Who thinks that wetlands are a valuable thing? Awesome. All right. Whew. I was kind of worried, but no. All right. So I agree that wetlands are incredibly valuable. And sometimes it is a struggle to demonstrate that value when you're doing project documents, when you're doing budgets, when you're trying to get civil leaders or members of a community to buy into the idea of restoration or preservation of these important ecosystems. And one way to help demonstrate the value that these ecosystems carry is by trying to value it either through monetary ways, or as we'll get into, there is just other regular classic ways through communication, storytelling, and regular old yes or no questions, which are my favorite. So first off, we will quickly go over what we're going to talk about. So today there's mainly 4 sections of this presentation. It is all about tidal wetlands and their importance. So we're going to start off about what are tidal wetlands and how are they important to Oregon. Then we're going to talk about socioeconomic evaluations and what the heck I mean when I keep saying this big long word. Then we'll move into steps for how to do such an analysis. If anybody in the audience or online is interested in conducting your own or pursuing this, this is kind of the point of this presentation, is to show how to go about evaluating these really critical habitats. And then finally, I will talk about a case study, which, I mean, we're all scientists here. We got to work in our own research now and again. So this is actually my graduate research thesis on the Southern Flow Corridor Restoration Project, which happened up in Tillamook, Oregon, so not too far away. So first off, tidal wetlands in Oregon. What are they? What do they do? And why should we value them? So initially, tidal wetlands, they are areas, basically they are wetlands that have a low elevation, highly vegetated, and they usually occur where rivers meet the oceans. Essentially, they are what you and many of us call estuaries. However, tidal wetlands aren't necessarily, not all estuaries are tidal wetlands, but most tidal wetlands, I would say, are estuaries. So usually there's a gradient from fresh to salt water, and they flood and drain in relation to the tides, making them different than a regular wetland, which will just be have its depths and amount of water in it change depending on flooding events and stuff like that. So as you can see in this this image here, all the different little aspects of tidal wetlands. We have tidal marsh, we have tide flats, open water, lots of stuff. Very cool and diverse habitats. So basically, why is it important to Oregon? Well, we have 17,500 acres, or about 27 square miles of this critical habitat left. And that's roughly the same size as 2.5 Newports on the entire Oregon coast. That's all we got. So room for improvement, I'll say that. And just to help kind of get it into your idea what we're talking about, we are right next to quite a few. If you go down the Yaquina River, there are a bunch of tidal wetlands that are still there currently to this day. So why do they matter? Well, essentially they provide many, many ecosystem services that are invaluable to us. They help increase water quality, they remove excess sediment and nutrients, they can improve coastal resilience by buffering against storm surges, as well as flooding events. So they kind of help from excess water coming from both sides. They provide vital habitat for important species of birds, fish, mammals, insects, and amphibians, whatever it is, they're probably hanging out there. They also help with sequestering carbon and other greenhouse gases, and they provide numerous community services such as recreational opportunities, beautification, education opportunities, and historical cultural ties, things of that nature. So why should we value them? I've been hinting at this before, but we have lost 85% of our tidal wetlands since white settlers arrived on the West Coast. So not great. Oregon itself is in the high 50s percentile loss. So we're better than the average along the whole coast, but we still lost over 50% of our tidal wetlands. And basically, it is important to value them, even though, and I won't dive into this too much, there is obviously kind of a moral question around, should we be putting dollar values to life, to these really important things that are invaluable in how they connect the world through water control, nutrient flows, habitat creation, all that stuff I mentioned before. But unfortunately, as I was discussing a little bit at the beginning, we have to kind of demonstrate the value of these things to people that don't have the background knowledge that many of us do and don't fully understand the importance of these ecosystems. So to help drive that home, for the amount lost, this red area represents, this is from another study by Brophy et al. And basically they found that these red areas are places around Yaquina Bay where there was historically tidal wetlands, and that has since been drained or controlled to the point where they don't really exist. And the green down here is the stuff that still is around. So not all hope is lost. And I've even heard rumors that they're working on bringing back this big loop here, which would be really cool. So next section, socioeconomic evaluations. What are they and how to do it? Basically, social and economic value is important within ecosystems because they provide, provide services that help individuals and communities. And this is called a benefit flow. I like to think of it as flowing benefits of like water into little communities and stuff, but that's just a visual metaphor. So you basically, we want to show the social and economic value of this habitat through various means of valuation and monetization. Some examples of this, of these benefit flows, would be money saved through avoided costs, such as flood control infrastructure that does not need to be constructed because the wetland is doing the job of that infrastructure instead. It can also be things like critical habitat, which provides vital resources and conditions for species of interest, such as salmon. So if we restore more of this habitat, maybe we don't need to pump as much money into hatcheries and salmon mitigation and stuff. There's inherent use, such as just the natural beauty of this and people's willingness to pay to just see this habitat out there. And then obviously there's things like cultural value for local Native American tribes and sovereign nations and local communities with really deep historical ties to this type of habitat. So how do you go about valuing this stuff? Well, essentially, you want to do it through, there's many ways, but you can go for market values or inherent values that people have placed on it through other studies. And a market value would be something like the social cost of carbon, which is $51 per metric ton of carbon released. There's also the price of a salmon. You could go purchase at a grocery store, and that's one version of the price of salmon. But of course, that price is different everywhere you look. So it gets more complicated the deeper you dive into that. There's obviously, as I discussed, avoided costs. So modeling, say, a water treatment plant and the cost of that versus just putting in a wetland and letting it do its thing. Then there's also for necessarily gathering that information. How do you go about finding out what the community thinks of this ecosystem and how much it's worth? You can do community engagement, such as surveying the populations of communities and seeing what they are willing to pay to increase habitat restoration or maintain current levels of habitat protection. And then finally, there is lots of fun things you can do with data, of course, lots of census data. As I learned doing this project, there is some data sets with some really creepy amounts of information in them. But don't have to get that far. You can just keep it with addresses and general income brackets and can really break down some interesting perspectives on how wealth equals people's interest in protecting natural resources, where you can target campaigns to help promote restoration projects and stuff like that. And we'll get to this later, but in my thesis, we looked at a housing price model and determined how much the restored habitat benefited the local housing market within the Tillamook community. So, third step. We are on to steps for socioeconomic analysis. And this was not supposed to be my individual research project. I apologize. That's the next section. So the main steps for conducting one of these analyses is first, you got to come up with a goal and your objectives for what you want to do, as with anything. Then you want to make sure you identify and engage your stakeholders and nearby sovereign communities and anybody else that may benefit from it. You want to cast a wide net, and we'll talk about that later, but widest net you can cast at the beginning, especially. Then we're going to go into 3, which is the benefit flow selection. You want to be able to identify those benefit flows and determine which ones you can evaluate and which ones might be out of reach. And then finally, we have the benefit flow evaluation, which is, as I discussed a minute ago, how you go about evaluating these things. And this will have some more examples to maybe make it a bit more clear than what I just brushed over in the last section. So first off, the goal and objective selection. So you need to decide the goals and objectives of the analysis are going to be. Questions to consider for this, for most things, are why do you want to do this and why do you want to know the value of this tidal wetland that you're evaluating? It's important to consider this because if you are doing it to justify the cost of a project, that will require different parameters and coming at it with a different idea than if you're just trying to show the value of an already existing wetland for voters to not, vote in new housing development there or something like that. Then you need to consider who your audience is and who wants to know this stuff. That'll determine, if you need to just do purely monetization, they only care about the end dollar value, or if they're open to more fluid ways of determining values, such as testimonies from local community members or surveys that have like a 1 to 5 scale of how much do you appreciate this kind of a thing. That's often used in many areas around the world to kind of help just judge, do people like this or not? but it's kind of something that we don't use too much here, which I find interesting. Then you obviously need to set up the scope. Are you going to look at this project's impact on the entire Western tectonic plate region, or are you just looking at the local town? There is many things to consider for picking that and how that'll affect your analysis. And then finally, what are the goals? What are you attempting to do and study? So, and then the one other thing to do is, if the project is already completed, some of your work's already done because they probably have goals for that project. And I recommend kind of just aligning with what they did, because they will have likely collected data, and people that are interested in this analysis were probably involved in the original construction and have a similar idea of what those goals were. So, number 2, stakeholder and sovereign engagement. So this was something that I came across as a challenge, I would say, in my personal research, as the project had already been completed. So it wasn't really easy to engage any stakeholders, nor was there any budget to do that, making it further adding difficulty there. So when you want to before a project has been initiated, ideally, you want to identify as many stakeholders as possible. And like I was saying earlier, casting that wide net for anybody who is involved in the project directly, for people that will be indirectly and immediately impacted by this project in the surrounding area. Maybe the community will to a certain level, maybe even the region will to a certain level through economics or flood control or something. So make sure that you are trying to initially look at as many people as possible, because the more you have on the radar, the more likely you'll realize that there's some really strong benefit flow somewhere that maybe you wouldn't have realized was there in the first place. And you could find thousands, if not millions of extra dollars through making sure you have the right stakeholders engaged in the process. Then you want to work with them to determine what about the project benefits them. This also makes your job easier, because they're just telling you. You don't have to go through and pour through data and go like, oh, hey, they're benefiting from this. They can just tell you, hey, I'm benefiting from that. Like, I already know that. I see it every day. So it also helps people feel engaged in the project directly. It's not just like some academic from on high is coming down and saying like, your project is worth this and you get this much benefit. They actually have a role in telling you and informing you what they gain from it. Next, the engagement can look like many things. Some examples are meeting with leadership of general groups. So this could be clubs, this could be community outreach groups, this could be tribal leaders. Then there's focus group meetings, which would be obviously trying to gather people, representation of the community or of the population that you're trying to engage in this process, and speak with them for an extended period of time, see how they feel like this project will impact them, what they'll benefit from it, and vice versa. How they can benefit the project, I should say. And then the big one is surveys. Obviously, you can do canvassing, door-to-door surveys, you can do mailing surveys, and those obviously have less response rates usually, but if you mail enough of them, you'll probably get enough back that you can get some important data. And that way you can really gauge what a massive chunk of the population thinks about it. And by massive, I mean like probably 10%. But on average, that's going to be a lot better than a focus group or something, which will give you a really in-depth view, but that view will be very tiny. So the survey, a lot less depth, but a much broader view of everything. And then finally, if the project is already completed, in my case, which is you just want to look at who were the stakeholders and who are the stakeholders now. Has that changed? Is there people to be included that weren't included in the original process? Stuff like that. So third step, the benefit flow selection and identification. And I really like this one. Be creative with it, because there is just so many bizarre ways that you don't even think about how ecosystems can benefit you. For example, we'll see this later, but the SFC project decreased the amount of time that Highway 101 was flooded by about 2 hours. And there's actually, for some reason, an equation that was created by the Federal Highway Administration that breaks down a cost per minute per person sitting in a traffic jam. And that uses local metrics on population breakdown and like traffic on that highway and the average income of people from the communities that are likely passing through it. And if you can find all that data, you can find out how much money in terms of time that you are saving people from having to sit in a traffic jam or go around a detour. So you never know where these benefits might be hiding. And at the beginning, especially, you want to try to find as many as you can, because again, it just increases your chances of going, hey, that one's really important and will like really demonstrate the importance of this ecosystem to this region. So tips for helping to narrow down the scope of this, because once you've identified everything, you'll be like, oh my God, there's so many things that this impacts. How do I know where to even focus? How do I even know what's worth spending my time on? So that's where I was talking about using the goals and objectives. They will help you narrow it down. If you are looking at something and it has nothing to do with what you're writing this paper, for any of the reasons why you're writing this paper, maybe don't include it. If it's also, you should look again at the stakeholders and what they told you. They will help identify some of those critical benefit flows that they are experiencing and help you eliminate ones that maybe they don't really care about or don't feel like they matter too much. And then follow the positives. Some benefits will be more valuable socially or monetarily than others. And you want to make sure to prioritize the larger ones, because as much as I hate saying it, we are looking for big numbers here. We're trying to demonstrate the value of these things and how important they are. So even if the service we find personally is really interesting and beneficial for an ecology standpoint, maybe the project funding side wouldn't care about it and would just prefer to see a giant number, which sometimes that's what happens. But either way, following those big benefits is usually best. So continuing on the selection, once you've narrowed down the categories, such as flood control or water quality improvement, you need to then determine what benefit flows you can actually monetize. So this involves determining what variables you need to demonstrate that this service exists. You have to prove, obviously, that something is happening. And to do that, you need to have the data to back it up. That is always includes before and after data. You need to have, or something like, you need a 1 and a 0, essentially. You need to have either before the project was implemented and then after the project was implemented data, or you need, hey, this community has a wetland and a similar community up the river doesn't have a wetland. And you need to be able to collect the same data from both communities and show the difference that that wetland provides. Otherwise, you can't really prove that there's been any change or any difference. So I recommend, and what I did was just collected all available data I had on the project. Now it was done, so that was easy, because I could just go around to people that had studied it and say, what data do you have? But at the same time, it was difficult because I couldn't go collect more data. I couldn't go back in time and say like, hey, could you study like river water temperatures before you put the project in? Because you didn't do that. So if you're going in ahead of time, that's where like real world constraints such as your project budget or whatever manpower or person power that you have, you should make sure to weigh that when you are picking what you can study and what you can't. So for example, just to talk like for the variables I'm talking about, for our category of water quality, we would say maybe there's an excessive nitrogen load. So you need to be able to know that you have the data that proves the nitrogen load changed going through the wetland or not. Then once you've collected and reviewed all of that, you can determine what variables you have enough data and what you don't to be able to include in your analysis. And then you're basically at the starting line. You've got all your ducks in a row, you've got all your data, variables, categories selected. It's all about the starting gun. Bang. So off we go. Benefit flow evaluation. After the available data is collected and consolidated, you can go. So there are many ways that this valuation can be done, and I've just listed a few here. I'm not going to dive too far down this rabbit hole because this is getting into the economic side of this study, which gets very complicated. And I will admit I am not an economist. I am a resource manager slash ecology background. So when I did my project, I was working under Dr. Stephen Dundas, who was an environmental economist and helped me a lot with this part. But essentially at the surface level, there is many things you can do where you don't need a massive amount of education and computing experience to value these ecosystems. So some of these include willingness to pay surveys, just going around and saying, hey, if we were to quote unquote raise taxes, this was a study that they did back in 2006. They asked many members of communities along the Oregon coast. We're going to pretend that there's a new ballot measure coming out in the next election cycle. And we're saying we would like to raise taxes by $25 for your household per year. And you will get, in theory, 80,000 more coho salmon returning to your area. Do you like that? Yes or no? And if you are willing to pay that, you would circle yes. And then you can just crunch that data, get back your survey, go, all right, we got this many people back, and 20% said no. So it looks like everybody really liked it. So those things are pretty easy. Benefit transfers can be simple, but we will talk about the pitfalls of benefit transfers here in a minute. But essentially, that is a benefit transfer is when you look at a study that somebody else did and you take their result and you put it in your study, which isn't bad. It works great. It saves a lot of time. But as I will mention, there are some pitfalls with it that you have to be careful of. Next, you want to look at just local and regional economic gains. This gets a little more complicated, but maybe there's an overall jump in economic growth within the tourism industry or recreation industry right after the project was completed. That would be a pretty good, strong indicator that it had a great beneficial effect on the local economy. Then obviously avoided infrastructure cost ranges in its complexity, but if you can get somebody to say, well, it costs us about $9,000 to install a tide gate, and you're like, cool, I don't need to do that because we put this wetland in, then there's $9,000 in your pocket to say this project prevented you from having to spend that, government body or whoever. Then you can also look at trends in local markets. This is getting a little more complicated into the needing to do some evaluations. And then the inherent value of beauty or created habitat, which can be done through surveying or summing up the services that that habitat benefits or benefit transfers. And then finally, increasing into marketable stuff like salmon or crabs or anything else that maybe that tidal wetland helps produce that then the market takes and sells. And as much as that sometimes frustrates me, it is an important part of these ecosystems and how they are directly tied to communities. And then I have, as I mentioned before, my math warning here. Many of the valuation methods that I have just mentioned do require, in many cases, an economist or statistical analysis in order to determine their correct values. So I highly recommend, and I will repeat this again later, if you are starting out a project and you have the ability to still get people involved with it, ask an economist to join your team, at least, even if it's just for this part, just doing this evaluation, because they can really help you say, I need this kind of data and I need it for these areas. And then people with ecology backgrounds or restoration backgrounds or whoever's in charge of the project can then adequately make sure that that data is collected so that it will be easily analyzed later. So I got back into those benefit transfers. So we've already talked a little bit about it. What is it? It is essentially transferring information available from studies that have already been completed in one location or context to another, which is where it gets tricky. This can only be accurately done if the conditions of the wetland used in that study are similar to the conditions at yours. And I actually have some examples on the next slide. So say, excuse me, we want to determine the value of recreational kayaking in a restored wetland along the Oregon coast. We know the average number of people that like to kayak in this restored area. And we have found a study from the Oregon Department of Forestry on Oregonians' willingness to pay for different recreational activities in Oregon. And one of those is kayaking in the coastal region of Oregon. Fantastic. You can easily use that number, even though maybe it's not for the specific area that you're looking at. It's for Oregon. It's from surveyed Oregonians, and it was for the region that you're looking at, the coastal region. Now, if that same study was for Eastern Oregon, maybe not, because that's a completely different environment. That's a completely different set of individual recreationalists and number of people that are kayaking out there and would be willing to pay different amounts to have access to it or not. And to further the not applicable side, we can talk quickly about this example of estimating the willingness to pay for ESA listed coho salmon to a local community. So you're trying to just determine how valuable these salmon are to this community. You know the average number of coho produced by this historical tidal wetland, but you are trying to just figure out how much people would think of it and the value of it. So you find a study from Washington about the value of Chinook to coastal communities. Can't use it because it's for Chinook. I actually came across this problem where the project helped increase local Chinook salmon populations, but there's no study on the value of Chinook, only coho, actually by my professor, Dr. Stephen Dundas. You should all check it out. It's a great report. But it is sadly not about what we're looking for. However, if you did find one about the correct species, then fantastic. Even if it's only for the Pacific Northwest, say like it's from Washington. You can argue that. You just have to bring it up in your analysis that, hey, I'm using this number from a report in Washington. So there might be some differences. Now, you can't do that if it was from Georgia. Unfortunately, that's too far away, too many different things to compare. So I hope that kind of clears it up. Benefit transfers are awesome. They save you a lot of time, can provide you a lot of great information, but you just have to be careful about it. So we'll just quickly go through two really fast examples of this whole kind of valuation process. So we're trying to find the willingness to pay to improve a tidal wetland habitat near a small coastal town. We could survey the population through canvassing or mail, and you could send out this questionnaire could include a little paragraph of background information saying why salmon are important and why this habitat is critical and necessary for these communities. And then you can provide them with a question, which would be something along the lines of, are you willing to pay an X amount increase per year in taxes to restore X amount of, Y amount of acres of restored habitat? Yes or no, and that can give you a very easy answer. And then if you want to dive into that further, you could have them give you a little bit more information, such as their address and sorry. Oh, you're good. Yeah, no, you're fine. I'll have to keep an ear out for them. Anyway, it was actually a check to make sure everybody was still awake, because I know this is super boring, but no. But yeah, anyway, you get the point on this guy. Another one could be avoided cost of a water treatment plant to remove high levels of nitrogen and sediment from agricultural and industrial runoff that's coming into this bay. And we're like, we want to stop that. So we build a wetland, and beforehand, we collect all of our data on how much stuff is flowing into the bay from the river. And then you can say that we would then need to study how much sediment and nutrients are trapped within the wetland itself, and then estimate the cost of building and maintaining a filtration or treatment plant to do the same amount of work, which would probably be thousands of dollars. And then you can turn around and say, look, this wetland is doing all this great stuff and it's for free. We don't have to touch it. It just does it on its own. And it saves, X thousands of dollars and having to build this complicated treatment plant that would be needed to maintain and have lots of filters and chemicals. So basically, the avoided cost there is the cost of that treatment plant. So then, and further, sorry, one last thing, further ways you could use the data that you've collected for this analysis is you could say, all right, so it's removing this amount of sediment. Maybe they don't need to dredge the shipping channels as much anymore because of that and stuff like that. So once you've gone through these 4 steps, you get to your final step, which is combine all of your beneficial values and subtract the ones that are negative, because you might get some of those. You might come across them on your way that like, hey, this actually hurts things. Like maybe the site releases more greenhouse gases than it did beforehand because of the change in land use and stuff like that. You got to be fair, you got to include that. But usually you will find a lot of benefits that will help cancel out anything negative. And once you combine it all, you're done, you're complete, you've done it. Good job. So we will quickly go through all of this one more time in the case study of the Southern Flow Corridor socioeconomic analysis. So as I mentioned before, this was done along the Oregon coast in Tillamook Bay, which is fed by 5 rivers. It is right above, sorry, it's outlined by this black line you can kind of see with the at the very bottom of that picture. It's right above the city of Tillamook, running right up against the edge of it, which is home to about 5,200 people. And the primary drivers of their economy are agriculture, fishing, forestry, and dairy products. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, who those people are. So what was done there? They basically restored 443 acres of tidal wetlands. And to do that, they had to remove 2.5 miles of levees, which are outlined here in this kind of brown color. Not ideal for seeing up there, but essentially it all got shifted back to those red ones. So they installed the red dots, which are new tide gates. They removed the green dots, which are old tide gates. And all the green and blue squiggles are new channels that they made, which came out to about 13.2 miles of restored channels, and ended up planting around 1,050 native plants to help get that area back up and running. Why was this needed to be done? Lots of historic flooding in Tillamook. Happens very regularly, lots of damage, as you can see, up to 3 million back in 2006. Not great. So their goal here was to provide an area for habitat creation and decrease flooding. And it cost a whopping 11.2, if you round up, $11.1 million to do this restoration project. So if we're going to go off, and I was hired as well as under my professor to evaluate the economics of this and see if it actually, the benefit to cost ratio ended up working out for us. So first step, goal analysis. The goals of the study were to identify and value ecosystem services provided by the project, identify holes in the collected monitoring data and prevent evaluation of ecosystem services, provide guidance on how to fill these data gaps, and then provide examples when applicable. So step 2, stakeholder engagement. Ooh, that was fancy. I did not know it did that. Yeah, stakeholder engagement, as I mentioned before, didn't really happen on this one. So we're just going to skip over that. Asterisks, actually, sorry. There is stakeholder engagement with this project, but it was at the beginning when they were building the project. I want to give the project managers their due credit. They did engage the local populace, and they helped. It was actually the design of the final project was the stakeholder approved version. So they were engaged all the way through the design aspect, just didn't have the time or money to do it on this analysis. But the stakeholders that we did identify were the citizens of Tillamook City, members of local tribes, as well as citizens of nearby communities around Tillamook Bay. Step 3, the benefit flow identification and selection section. So this was the goals of the project. There was 5 of them. It was to improve water quality, decrease flooding, provide habitat, sequester carbon, and provide additional benefits, whenever necessary. Stuff like that. So first, water quality. What things within water quality did we look at? What variables? We were trying to determine sedimentation impact, temperature and dissolved oxygen, and nitrogen load. For flooding, we wanted to look at flood mitigation impacts, Highway 101 and inundation time, and local sea level rise. For habitat creation, we were looking at salmon and wildlife habitat creation. Then for carbon sequestration, obviously carbon storage, as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And finally, recreation in the housing markets for additional community benefits. Step 4, the benefit valuation. So the of many of those things that I listed before, we could not value them all. Most of the time it was because there was not sufficient data from before the project or after the project to prove that the things that we wanted to prove had actually changed. For example, water quality and water temperature variable. We knew that there was excessively high temperatures in the channels, likely causing dead zones due to low oxygen before the project was done, but they didn't look at it afterwards. And as far as I know, they maybe haven't yet, but they were planning to do in the future. So we couldn't evaluate it during this study, but hopefully in the future they will be able to. But the things that we did collect data on was the sedimentation rate and sediment accumulation rate within the bay and the project site itself. Flooding, we were able to view a model of the flood reduction and see that they reduced 4,800 acres of flooding around the city of Tillamook, as well as decreased the flooding on Highway 101 and probably impacted the influence of local sea level rise. However, that gets really complicated and we ended up having to drop that because of the scope of such an analysis was a bit beyond us. So moving on, habitat creation, we knew the amount of habitat restored, we knew it increased local Chinook populations. Carbon sequestration, we knew it stores about 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent in the project site over its lifetime, as well as the greenhouse gases it emits. And we knew the value of homes sold in and around Tillamook from 2011 to 2019, thanks to a somewhat creepy data set. And we know the recreational activities present at the site. So what could we actually value out of all of that? Keeps whittling down as you go. You get less and less stuff and data and things get in the way. But at the end of the day, we managed to show that water quality restoration saves between $1,500 to $8,000 per year in dredging costs of Tillamook Bay and the shipping lanes there. Flooding reduced estimated savings of $7,200 per flood event from avoided traffic delays, as we were talking about earlier. Habitat creation, we could not value it, unfortunately, due to not having that value of Chinook here in Oregon. But hopefully someone will study that soon, and then we will know. Carbon sequestration, that was a great one. We were able to value the stored carbon at $530,000 to $736,000 over the project's lifetime. And that's for the economists out there, that is the net present value of that stuff. So we estimate it takes 50 years to do it, and we collapsed all that benefit back to modern day times, which comes out to those numbers. And then prevented emissions due to land use change. So there was a decrease in carbon emissions from the project site itself, just from the processes going on there. And that came out to about 167,000 per year. And the additional community benefits is where the real zinger comes in here. We did a housing market evaluation using a hedonic model, and I can talk about that more later if anybody has any questions, but it's a bit deep to get into now. But essentially, we found out that the project increased the value of homes within 3/4 of a mile of the project site. And that value was about 10% increase in the value of the home. So on average, averaging out all of the homes that were in 3/4 of a mile of the project site, that came out, that 10% increase averaged out to about $1,800 to $2,000 per home per year in increased value. And if you apply that to the roughly 1,000 homes that are within 3/4 of a mile of the project site, you get $1.8 to $2 million per year in an increase to the housing market, which on a net present value level comes out to $19.2 million. So that's a lot of money that this community is gaining due to having promoted the restoration of this tidal wetland habitat. So tying it all together, we're at the end here. Don't worry. Implications for future studies here. Just remember, your projects are valuable. That is the important takeaway. There is value to be found in any project. Even if you can't necessarily justify the total cost of it, you can sure as heck cut away a lot of that cost and say that it is still worth the effort and investment. Even if not all of the benefits are able to be proved monetarily, there are many, many benefits that you can find that people are just willing and excited to have that kind of habitat restoration next to them happening right outside their door. Some final tips and takeaways from my experience doing this. Consult an economist and other experts early. I mentioned this before and I'm mentioning it again. Please do this. It will really help you. Emphasize, again, the pre and post data collection. You have to have both of those and able to prove that your thing was successful. Consider as wide of a community inclusion as possible and think creatively and at a large scale. Just trying to think of any way that that project is impacting the community and see if that has any benefits for it. So I think I'm a little bit over time, but thank you so much for listening. And I hope, let me know if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to open up questions. I'm actually going to start with any questions online. Okay, so for folks online and students joining in the seminar for class, please put any questions into the chat box and we'll work through those. But we do have some questions in the room. So John.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I was sort of surprised at the end of it all that there's only like $7,000 savings on flood control.
Yes.
And then on the other side of it, the housing prices went up by 10%.
Yes.
Is there any kind of a link to that? And how do you make a link to housing prices going up 10% and the project?
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a great question. Oh, I love talking about this. So we were trying really hard to make this connection here because the $7,000 only comes from the reduction in flooding at Highway 101. The rest of the 4,800 acres that saw a decrease in flood levels, we could not find an accurate way to capture that value to those homeowners because we tried looking at FEMA flood insurance claims over the time, but unfortunately, the claim process changes significantly over that span from 2011 to 2019. So you couldn't compare year to year or flood event to flood event very easily. We even reached out to FEMA and had one of their analysts work with us to try to see if they could kind of tweak the numbers to get them in line. But even when they did look into doing that for us, some of the flood events only had, 3 claims. So you can't really make an argument with that either. There just isn't enough data. But as you pointed out, it is likely that that flood reduction benefit is being translated or seen in the economic gains of the housing market because people are saying, hey, this house isn't flooding anymore, or at least not as much as it used to, hopefully not anymore at all. And therefore, I don't need to worry about having to pay so much in damages and stuff, and therefore the value of that home went up. How to go about proving that into the future, we recommended that the project managers continue to monitor the housing market and see how long this benefit lasts. It's expected to only last 2 to 4 years because people will forget what it was like before the project was in place and how bad flooding was, and therefore the value of those homes might drop back down. They might stay where they are. That is to be seen. But in the meantime, if you owned a house there back when this project was completed, you were in luck. Trying to think. I hope that answered your question for the most part. Is there one extra part that I didn't get to?
Are you all right, John, or you want to follow up? Okay, we have a question. We'll jump to a question online and then we'll do follow up.
So this question is from Fairla. Do you have any recommendations for approaching Indigenous stakeholders for this type of project? If you'd been able to make contact with stakeholders for your research in Tillamook, are there any specific things you wish you could have done in addition to what the original study design has accomplished?
Yes. I would have loved to, just to quickly answer the second question first, because it ties into what you were asking. I would have loved to have surveyed the community through a mail or door to door and been like, hey, did you benefit? There was a flood event back, it was in 2017. So just after this project was completed, there was a massive flood event. I would love to go around and ask them, hey, did you experience the same amount of flood as back in 2011 when there was like a comparable flood? Did you, and was there any decrease in damages and stuff like that? Just to get the idea, not even necessarily a money value, but just to hear it from people like, this has helped me, this decreased the flooding on my property or my house. So that would have been one thing I would have loved to have engaged with if I could have engaged more stakeholders. I also would have loved to have just asked the general Tillamook community as a whole, as the benefits from the project that we could look at, the housing market, very limited, as we were saying, only within 3/4 of a mile did we see the most benefit gained from that project in the housing market. If we were able to survey the whole community, we could have got things about like people's opinions on it and whether or not they'd be willing to pay for increasing the amount of land that there's still plenty of land there that they could restore. So maybe you could look into, are they willing to pay some extra tax dollars to get that land restored, or are they just happy with the fact that the project exists? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how happy does that make you? You can do studies like that. So I would have loved to have done something along that lines. And for engaging Native American communities or sovereign nations, obviously, you want to do it respectfully. And basically, I would recommend just, if they have any kind of outreach or in education centers or people in the community that kind of are in a liaison role of engaging with people that want to come into the tribe and engage with members of the tribe, going through them and asking how it would be best to approach members of the community. Do they believe that it would be best to do an anonymous survey? Do they believe it would be best to do focus groups and have members of the tribal communities come in and tell you about the importance of this kind of habitat to maybe some historical traditions that they have, or to ancestral lands or something like that. Yeah, I think that's
All right, question in the room.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is a bit of a follow-up. When you say there is a 10% increase in property value, is that just in the absolute sense or is relative to the rest of the community? How was that tied to the lack of flooding?
Yes. So we can't tie it directly to flooding. That's just our hunch. There's no data for that, but that's just what we think is probably the cause. But the 10% is in relation to the rest of the community. So we basically did a hedonic price model where we took as many values as we could think of that impact the value of a home within the community. That's the square footage, the number of bathrooms. Actually, I have a slide for this because I thought people might ask. Let's see. So this is Eric, by the way. He's my cat. So if I can go back. Yeah, so basically we wanted to look at the hedonic price analysis assumes that people are willing to pay more money for something that they like, which generally falls along the lines of how things work, but not always. But essentially, it's a very common way of estimating the value of these kind of ecosystems, as you look at how it's impacted people's willingness to pay to be closer to them or to have access to them. So to help tease out the value that the habitat has added to that house, you first have to find everything else that might impact the value as best you can. So square footage, bathrooms, number of rooms, where it's located, how close to the highway it is, what the tax bracket it's in is, zoning, sorry. And then you use that in your model, and you need to make sure, what we did is we basically compared to Gibraltar and Bay City, which are two other communities located along Tillamook Bay. So we looked at their housing markets and the trends over those housing markets. So each year in this case was a variable. So you could say like, oh, 2009, for whatever reason, we have no idea what happened in 2009. Would anybody have a clue on that? Why the housing market suddenly shifted a lot? And they that was just, you know, that shift in the market was all accounted for by that variable. So you didn't have to worry about it impacting what we were looking for. So, and essentially it works by once you have isolated everything else that could, here, I'll skip to this table that I'm looking for. There we go. Once you've teased out all this stuff, so this is most of the things we were looking at. You can see, as I was mentioning, there's acreage, total rooms, square footage, bathrooms. So number of bedrooms. The treated section are houses that are within a mile of the project site. So you can think of it as we are trying to look at one housing market, but we're kind of drawing an imaginary line down the middle of it. And before we do any analysis, we have to make sure that our imaginary line isn't like distorting the housing market as a whole. So in this case, there's a roughly on average 2.6 bathrooms in the treated section and 2.37 bathrooms in the non-treated section. So most of the houses in Tillamook on average have 2.3 bathrooms. And that was pretty much the same within the treated section. And then you can see with the square footage, it was almost about the same as well. So things like that helped us feel confident that we had managed to tease out all the other variables that impact the value of a house, and what's left over was likely due to the project. I hope that answered your question. That's also a rabbit hole because that was my thesis project. So sorry. That was a little thing I wrote about.
All right, question online.
For your project, were you actually a part of the whole restoration process, or was your thesis all about the analysis of the project? Additionally, would you consider this project a habitat management project because some of your steps really lined up with the process for making a management plan for habitats?
Thank you for the question. Yes. For the habitat management. I hadn't thought about it. That's a good point though. And then for the, I was sadly not involved in the restoration. I wished I was. It was a partnership between NOAA and the Tillamook Estuary Partnership. If you have any questions about this restoration project, please feel free to reach out to the Tillamook Estuary Partnership. They would love to talk to you about it. And maybe even get you out there to help remove some invasive plants if you're interested. Sadly, I would love to have been involved in the restoration. That's where I'm aiming career-wise. I would want to get there, but unfortunately, I just got brought into after the fact, and I got the opportunity to do this awesome study. So I'm still happy to be involved with it in some level.
All right, any other questions in the room? Any other questions online? Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Do you think this project could spur more restoration projects to bring more tidal wetland areas back in different areas, not just in the Pacific Northwest?
Ooh, yes, I believe so. This the idea of this presentation and kind of format of this how-to guide is to show that this isn't, you know, I don't have a degree in economics, and we did the complicated housing market analysis with my professor, who is an environmental economist. So I had that help. But most of the benefit flows that we evaluated, you did not need complicated math to do. It was a lot of just X number of things that it does times the price of those things. When people are trying to replicate this in other areas, it's going to be the same general steps. It's going to be the same general process because you just need to identify those ecosystem services and figure out how to monetize them or value them in some way. I think that answered the question, I hope.
All right, another question online. We got lots of students that are taking.
I have an announcement from his professor,
Oh.
Stephen Dundas.
Oh, no.
There is a NOAA Tech memo that describes this process, and he has left the link to that tech memo for anybody that would like to consult it.
Awesome. Well, hi, Dr. Dundas. And that does remind me, before I close out here, I wanted to thank Dr. Dundas at OSU for all of his help with this project, as well as NOAA, the Tillamook Estuary Partnership, the company I work for currently, Linker, for all of their support with me promoting this. as well as various other groups that have been involved throughout this project. So just wanted to make sure everybody knew they were involved. Again, if you're interested, the Tillamook Estuary Partnership would love to talk to you further about this. I'll hang out definitely after this to if anybody has any questions or comments they'd like to discuss with me. And I hope you all had a good time. I didn't put you all to sleep, so that's good.
All right. Thank you so very much for being here today. One more thank you for our speaker. All right. For everybody in the room, hope to see you next week. And everybody online, same thing. Hope to see you soon. All right, everybody. Till next time.
Better than I. Oh, that's great. Well, I'm glad you did.
For folks online, we're going to end the presentation. Thank you.